Welcome everyone. My name is Federica Pestagallo and I'm an operator and also a cultural mediator for Chinese of the cooperative Be Free against trafficking, violence and discrimination. In this part of the module we will talk about the construction, the building of the network and in particular some details about the network work, how to build multidisciplinary networks, the criteria for the construction of the networks, and the cooperation between services, integration between operators, institutional and non-institutional services. Why is there a need for a network against violence? The Istanbul Convention indicated clearly the importance of an anti-violence network for the prevention and the fight against gender-based violence. We know that the Istanbul Convention focuses on violence and puts the rights of the victims at the center of all the measures implemented and indicates that it is fundamental to have a good collaboration between all the institutions and the various centers. These measures should involve all the subjects when necessary, the NGOs, parliaments, national and regional authorities, together with the institutions that are in charge of making human rights respected, with particular attention to anti-violence centers and anti-violence services. Another reason behind why there is a need for a network is the fact of getting out from isolation for the woman who was victim of violence. We know that this is one of the indicators, isolation, one of the indicators of violence, because women remain lonely, they are isolated, and so the creation of this network is at the basis of the project of the woman. And this practice has an immediate psychological advantage because it overturns the isolation inflicted by another person. Generally, the woman is deprived of a social network and in general a network of acquaintances that take her out of their houses. And this limits the empowerment of the woman. What is the anti-violence network? It is a set of institutional players such as police forces, hospitals, counseling centers, schools, social services, and third sector such as anti-violence centers, employment centers, and other associations that act, each one according to their competencies, for the prevention and the fight against the gender-based violence. So the network guarantees to be, better widespread and to be more effective compared to the work of individuals. And so this is more effective than acting separately. The general goal is to enhance homogeneous shared procedures to be followed and at the same time ensure a constant connection between the actors within the network as well as an adequate support and assistance to the person. What does the network allow us to do? First of all, the network allows the woman to feel safer. So she knows that she is trusted, believed, and she knows that she can trust the centers against violence, that she can ask for support there, but she can also access a whole series of other institutions and authorities that might help her. So even when a woman finds it difficult to go out of home without a partner, it is easy to find this sort of neutral service. And so asking for help represents something easier and a greater protection for the woman, especially considering that also police forces are involved in the network. A network also provides access to further resources because the greater the number of services in the network, the greater the number of resources available. A network also speeds up response times thanks to a coordination of services, thanks to which we need shorter time to get responses and solutions because, all these stakeholders and operators have already been informed on a case of a specific situation and there has already been some communication. When there is a network, there is also a lower risk of secondary victimization. So the woman is not forced to, repeat the story or she doesn't risk to be held guilty for remaining within the relationship, for not asking help beforehand. And so this also allows for lower risk of secondary victimization. And last but not least, a better coordination of responses and a greater effectiveness. And so the network limits all the negative effects that the violence holds. What else can we do thanks to the network? The network helps to define some common procedures to be adopted, becoming more competent, more aware, reducing also the workload of operators and their burnout, and so be more effective. So it defines the common procedures and, in general, contain the difficulties that an operator may encounter when welcoming and getting to know a potential victim. So the network also allows us to respond adequately to the needs of a person that is in a condition of vulnerability. This chart shows you an ideal network. So, a possible network, it's not the only possible one, but it's maybe the most effective, the ideal one for an effective intervention for women. In this scheme, the woman is at the center. So it is woman-centered and it is the active subject for change. Irrespective of whom has reported the situation, it is important that the woman remains at the center, remains the focus, and that he collaborates with the operators to decide what kind of project to follow. Then there are several services and bodies surrounding the woman. Courts, anti-violence centers, employment centers, social services, police forces, shelters, as well as hospitals or health posts, local health services, as well as the family network, which is always a very important support that very often is not the first contact point for women. They generally tend to get farther from their families in case of violence. As for the building of a network, there are some common practices and different phases of intervention that stakeholder implement. And the different phases or the different steps include first an initial contact and then the so-called orientation or guidance phase. Here it is very important for operators to guide the woman by telling her what kind of pathways she can follow. And then there is another important point, that is the assessment of the needs and the risks in order to, make an assessment of the kind of danger the woman is in, the kind of risks and the kind of needs she has. Then, taking in charge, that is the creation of a stable, continuous relationship with at least one service of the network. So the woman can be referred to other services. The important thing is that the case is well known by at least one service of the network. Then the support. The support which doesn't necessarily happen with, psychological support, psychological meetings, but it can be provided in different forms. If we consider social services, support might also be support in finding a shelter or other kinds of resources that can be provided by the social services. And it's clear that the support also changes according to the kind of service that provides it. Then step point 5 is the achievement of the empowerment and of the independence of the woman. And all the services that can be provided on the basis of a personalized pathway and on the basis of each specific service. All these phases, all these steps must be implemented within the network and with the participation of different stakeholders, different players that are in network with each other. These steps also translate into common practices. That is, the possibility of creating a trust relationship with the victim in an empathic and not judgmental environment with a methodology that is based on empowerment. So we must be able to welcome and listen to the woman and let her feel free to talk and not feel judged. There is another important precondition that is to be considered when we get to the practice. That is intersectionality. What does it mean? It means that in order to face effectively gender violence, we need to have an all-encompassing view and so address the multidimensional problems that characterize the individual violence, because not every individual violence is like the other. And there are several aspects to be included. Within one's working group, it is important to start from an assessment and analysis and investigate how the working team and the professional group reflects on violence, the kind of thought about violence, and also assess any possible barriers that may limit any possible prejudices that could prevent access to the support provided by the professionals. So everyone should be aware of one's story. That is, we must be able to start from ourselves and eliminate all the prejudices that might prevent to, achieve an effective intervention. For this reason, if we consider the anti-violence project as a multidisciplinary approach, it is important to consider that experience and gender-based violence take different forms according to the different aspects of a woman's identity. We have already said and repeated that women are not all the same. The stories of violence are not all the same, and so we cannot have standardized approaches, standardized paths and projects, but we need to consider the specific features such as age, religion, culture, family, or in case of migration, the story of their migration, because there are traumatic experiences related to the migration from their home country, or traumatic experiences that they had in their home countries and that forced them to leave. So we need to consider the personal story and the personal experience of everyone, and also education, gender identity, the civil status, marital status, and any possible health problems or disabilities. How can we start thinking as a network? With a practical exercise, some brainstorming, starting from the knowledge of one's territory. So, for example, in your opinion, what are the authorities, associations and institutions that could be involved in the creation of an anti-violence network? And what are the tools that you would like to use for building the network? Try to think in your countries, who are the players, the actors within the anti-violence network, and try to understand which tools the anti-violence network could use in your country, together with the strategic areas and procedures to get at violence and to achieve independence. Because you know that in every country, we cannot have, the same network. It cannot be the same. But we must be aware of the specific structure of the territory and of the resources that are provided, that are available. So, if we think of the chart that I showed you earlier, which was woman-centered, even here it is important to focus on the already existing institutions and try to brainstorm on all these points. The first tool that we used for building the network was actually a map of the territory, because when we start building a network, it is important to, first of all, identify the possible existing associations and NGOs that are already working against violence. And so create this map and indicate other institutional places, organizations and associations that a woman can get in touch with. Because, when a woman asks for help, we need to be able to provide the woman with a real map of the existing services in the local area. Another important tool are institutional network meetings. These network meetings are held on a regular basis and whenever necessary. in order to introduce and get to know each other, together with the presentation and the implementation of procedures. So there are meetings also to establish a real network communication system. These meetings should be effective at an administrative level as well. And so the aim should be to analyze the economic resources that the network can rely on. We cannot think of everything being carried out on a voluntary basis. And so this approach helps to understand the real scope of the network. There are also good practices, protocols and guidelines drafted during or after the meetings. These guidelines can be used by all the participants in the network. The protocol give a framework for the cooperation and the coordination of all the players involved, and the good practices give specific objectives according to the specific needs. In particular, a territorial protocol may include a description of the roles, the tasks and the responsibilities of each actor, so that all the signatories are responsible for the commitments made. So the protocol is really written and signed, a sort of agreement for the commitment of all the services that are involved in this network against gender-based violence. The tools also include training prevention, awareness, production of information material, together with information campaigns to raise the awareness among the population. There is also a follow-up and monitoring of the network itself. As for the training, it can be either within each service, each institution, or an external training for the territory. And the same goes for the information materials, which can be shared by all the members of the network, or each member of the network can have their own information material if they want. This is why it is important for future follow-up and monitoring to have economic resources to make the network more official. There is another tool for the creation of questionnaires, the creation of violence detection questionnaires, and the adoption of risk assessment tools. In particular, we know that there are lots of questionnaires for the assessment of risk in Europe. They are all very effective and valuable. And here we focus on the DA5. It is a questionnaire for risk assessment consisting of 5 questions. And the questions are: has the frequency and or severity of physical violence increased in the past 6 months? Has the perpetrator ever used a weapon or threatened you with a weapon or attempted to strangle you? Do you think the perpetrator can kill you? Did he ever hit you during pregnancy? Is the perpetrator violently and constantly jealous of you? This is a standard tool, but it has been validated to assess situations of violence and in particular the existing risk level and also the risk of escalation and re-victimization. It is widely used in Italy by the healthcare professionals because it is very, direct, quick to use, especially in emergency contexts. And if there are 3 or more questions with yes, to which the person responded yes, the health and the safety of the person is at risk. This also gives us an idea of the level of awareness of the woman, awareness of the situation and the risk, the danger related to the situation. And so if she can understand that she is actually experiencing a very risky or a risky situation in general. Apart from the questionnaire for risk assessment, there are also other questionnaires that can be used in the construction of the network to investigate more generically the situation of a woman, such as other experiences of violence in the past. Risk assessment is also adopted by the Anti-Violence Center, and the other questionnaires can be used by all the services involved in the network. Another important tool is the involvement of local associations. So associations that are not necessarily within the network, but that might be involved or take part in some actions in order to guarantee the effectiveness of the empowerment process. A process that accompanies and expands the primary project to get out of the violence. So the primary need is to get out of the violence for the safety of the woman. And it also mentions, let's say, a new approach, a new pathway towards independence. If the network becomes larger and includes more associations, it is easier to get to the final empowerment and independence of women. The network is cross-cutting, and all the services within the network have the same power, let's say, even if they perform different functions. However, coordination is fundamental, and the Anti-Violence Center and the NGOs that manage it are generally the control room, so to say, that coordinates and facilitates the interaction of the various stakeholders, as well as operational consistency. The Anti-Violence Center is also often in charge of coordinating the necessary actions in order to build and maintain the reference territorial network. We know that the anti-violence centers, such as anti-violence associations or feminist associations, have played a fundamental role since the 70s for the protection of the victims of violence and also for the spreading of a culture based on gender equality. So having an anti-violence center managing the network facilitates the knowledge of the phenomenon and also raises awareness among the different operators. It also reduces the burden that support entails, and helps offering an adequate service, because all the operators within the network know that they can count on the anti-violence center and on the anti-violence operators that have been specifically trained for that. It is important that someone acts as a coordinator in the network for consistency, for follow-up, and also for proposing possible improvements. Another important figure within the network and within the individual services in the network is the case manager. The case manager is the person that is fundamental for a successful empowerment, and it is the person appointed by the organization for coordinating the in-house professionals that have been activated and necessary for the woman. They also, the case manager is also in charge of keeping and coordinating the connections between the women and the various professionals in the organization. The case manager is also in charge of the monitoring in order to, implement the services offered by each service within the network. Another important tool that the network can use is the information form or information sheet. For the anti-violence network to be built and kept, it is important to have a shared system exchanging information with communication and collaboration, thanks to effective tools, respecting all the rules and regulations for the protection of sensitive data and the privacy of women. So the information form is important to have some continuity, have a database created with the information. It is also fundamental for the monitoring and follow-up of the network's work. Here is a sample of the information form. This was created by us, but it can be adapted according to the types of services and of institutions. You see the age of the beneficiary, gender, the country of origin, the migration status, so the kind of document that they hold, the forms of violence, or the form or the forms of violence, and how the woman got in contact with the service. This always allows us to implement our actions. So let's suppose that most of women get in contact with a specific institution, a specific authority through the website. Well, this allows us to understand that we will have to focus on this tool and make it more accessible. Or if a contact is made via phone call, or again, if women prefer direct contact in person. So we always write it in the information form, and we also write how the counseling was organized, face-to-face, online, over the phone, and any other relevant information that are fundamental if the woman is referred to other services and specialists. And then we indicate the needs of the woman and the next steps. It might be legal assistance or the need for a shelter, social worker. or healthcare, or language courses, or job guidance. Last but not least, in the information form, we also indicated what services could not be organized or referred to for several reasons. And so this information form can be adapted to the various needs, but it is very important to have it in order to, keep track of what has been carried out, write it down, and communicate more efficiently also with other services within the network. The personal information of women can be written in the informational form only upon the consentment of the woman. So if the woman agrees to share the personal data, the information can be processed. It is very important that all information is given in a comprehensible language for the woman, so the forms shall be translated into the specific language, or it is important to have a mediator helping the communication. Every network, every service within the network will agree on a format to be used for the treatment of personal data and the women's consent. As for formal and informal networks, so we can say that not all networks are the same, and generally formal networks consist of anti-violence centers, social and health services, police forces, and it works through protocols, guidelines, follow-up forms, shared and standardized strategies. But there is also an informal network made up of people and not regulated by formal procedures, but that is the result of individual initiatives or political activism and operates at a local level. In some cases, these formal and informal networks can have organizations within them that are part of, the informal networks can have some parts within them that belong to the formal networks. And what are the differences and limits? The network services are like a mosaic, but it is very important that each service, each organization focuses on its own competencies. And so their task is specific, diversified, and it is important to focus on it, to think of the specific competencies that they have. Even if there are good practices that the formal network doesn't always standardize and are often left to the sensitivity of professionals that are a member of it, that are part of it. And then there is another limit, that is the continuity of operations and the consistency. It is very important that a network also has stable economic resources to guarantee continuity and consistency of the intervention. Otherwise, protocols only remain, abstract, sterile agreements with no practical actions and results. So it is important to have a follow-up, a monitoring system. And very often informal networks that that are based on the direct knowledge and on personal or social relationships can be effective, but cannot always guarantee the right information flow within the network. And so this hinders the consistency of operational practices and the quality of the intervention. The two networks, so formal and informal networks, should be merged, trying to, structure the good practices with a continuous communication among all the services and the organizations. As we've indicated in a report of 2015, in Europe, not all areas have the same resources, not all areas can benefit from the same number of anti-violence centers, and so the actions that they can take are not based on the same kinds of resources. So even also the construction of the network changes according to the type of the territory in which it is built. So the more official gets the anti-violence network, the greater the effectiveness it can have. A last tool of the anti-violence network is a tool that is fundamental for achieving empowerment. Empowerment is a process that must be accomplished and achieved in collaboration with public and private services, designing tailor-made, personalized projects for women that include job placement or reintegration at work, as well as housing independence. And if the network works and is effective, the woman can really build her life from every point of view and abandon the isolation that characterized her life for a long time. Because empowerment is not just about the private sphere, but it also involves the strengthening of a broader set of women's social, political, and economic rights. So this is the goal that any kind of anti-violence network should have. So thank you very much for your attention, and goodbye.